We have placed creative writing within broad philosophical concerns, which is discovering your creative gift, raising awareness, and being an agent of positive force in the world. Now, these are concerns that you should have at the back of your mind, so that you know that we are not talking in a vacuum. We are talking within a very profound context in which we want to make a difference in the world. But our immediate concern is to provide instructions for you to write. We are assuming now that you have started writing, that you have identified a character, and you have linked the character to one of the archetypes that we have been talking about. For example, an athlete or an artist or a scientist or a caregiver in the world or a guru, mentor. So you have a character with motivation, and now your character needs to be placed, and I hope you have already done that. You have placed your character in a location, and that location has a geography, flora and fauna, a climate, and it also has a social, cultural, political, economic background. All this to make your story credible, believable, and authentic. We are assuming that you are writing a realistic kind of a story. Later on we'll be talking about other kinds of stories to write. I want to turn to the third element today. We have discussed character, we have discussed location, and let's talk about time. When we approach time, we approach something which is complicated. There's a lot to say about time in fiction, but I want to simplify it by talking about two kinds of time. One is the story time, and the other is the reading time. Let's talk about reading time first. Now, reading time is quite simple. It's the time that takes you to read a piece of short fiction. And we said that short fiction is usually brief, compressed, and it is something that can be read in one sitting. Now, there are some short stories, short fiction, which is very short. It could even be a page or 2 pages long. There's a short story by Ernest Hemingway, which is called A Very Short Story, which can be read within 15 minutes. But there are classic short stories by the masters like Maupassant, Chekhov, and O. Henry. These stories are long and complicated. Now, if you turn to a story like The Necklace, which is by Maupassant, you will learn a great deal about some of the things we're talking about characterization, location, and also plot, which we haven't talked about, but we will get to that eventually. I want to focus on time today. So reading time varies from very short stories to long, complicated stories. You have to know that there are many kinds of short stories, different lengths, depending on the kind of writer one is. Now, turn to story time. Now, story time is the time within a story. It could be just a moment in a character's life. It could be a day. It could be several months. It could be a year. It could be several years. Now, you have to think carefully about the time factor in your story, because you're interested in showing the character grow and change, and the character will grow and change within time. The character cannot change quickly or abruptly The time factor is very important. So you have to work out the age of the character. How old is the character? You have to work out what time the story takes place, whether the story takes place in the daytime or nighttime. You have to think about the particular historical time. What year is it? 2003, 2013? What is your time? And you have to think about the duration of the story. How long does the story take? It could take a moment to 100 years. If you have 100 years, time has to be compressed. So think about these three elements while you're writing your short fiction. Think about character, think about location, think about time. Now these constitute what we call the three unities in fiction. This unity will be found in fiction as well as in cinema. And the unity of time, the unity of character, the unity of location gives your writing cohesion. It gives it unity. Now, let's try and invent a story together and think about these elements. Now, the story that I have just thought out of the cuff is about a boy and a girl. Suppose it's kind of a love story. The boy and the girl, they live in a small town. They go to school together. All this happens before the military coups in Fiji. The boy grows and becomes an insurance agent, and the girl becomes a school teacher. And eventually they marry, and they have a very good life. They live happily for a while, until the man dies accidentally during the first military coup in 1987. Now that's a very tragic event in the story. After a year, the school teacher remarries. This time she marries a struggling motor mechanic from a nearby garage. Now, they don't live happily, they live unhappily for a while. And because they are so unhappy, the mechanic decides to leave her, and he goes and marries another woman. Now, we could leave the story there. It's an open-ended story which asks the question, what is the school teacher going to do now? Is she going to marry again, or she is going to live a life all by herself? Now, if you go back to that bare-bone structure of a story, you will see that it is a story, because it has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end, and there is a lot that is suggested in that story. For example, we said the boy and the girl grew in a small town. Okay, boy and a girl, they go to school together, so presumably they fall in love, they are childhood sweethearts, and they live in a small town. And a small town in Fiji would be a town where there is a service station, grocery shop, a small market. So you can visualize it. Although I didn't talk about all this, but when I mention a small town in Fiji, you will immediately think of a town like that, with a service station, grocery shop, small market, and a bus stand. Now, the characters. I mentioned the boy and the girl, the man and the woman. I did not give any name, but you can visualize. When I mention insurance agent, you will probably have a rough idea what the man looks like. He's probably well dressed, and he has got a regular income, and the woman is a school teacher. They have enough money. And then I say that the man dies accidentally during the military coup. I did not say how. It is left to your imagination. I had talked about the art of suggestiveness. And art of suggestiveness is a very strong thing that you have to cultivate, because you're working within the limited form of a short story. You have to suggest a great deal. Now, then the school teacher marries a struggling motor mechanic. Now, this is the rather unromantic part of the story. It begins with the romance, and it becomes unromantic. The mechanic leaves her. And I do not say what happens to her at the end. I leave this to the imagination of the reader. Now, this constitutes a story. It may not be a short story. A short story is different from just a story. A story is a series of events. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But it may not be a short story. It may not be a short fiction, because short story and short fiction have very precise definition. And it is that definition of a short story, short fiction, that I would like to focus on in the subsequent session.